permanently put some roots down, and all of those great things. And so we're gonna do a mailer. We're gonna do some door hangers that we're gonna canvass neighborhoods with. I'm gonna need you guys to be praying about signing up to do that. We'll have all that information, the dates and all that stuff over the next couple of weeks. But we're going. Okay, we're gonna pin our. We really are going to put it in the left lane and put the pedal down. Not figuratively. We're literally going to do it. All right. We're going to deliver on that promise that's been made to us, and we're going to push, and we're going to go. And we're going to spread the good news. And we're going to reach as far as we can reach. And so part of that, I challenge you guys, hey, let's raise $30,000 above and beyond our average weekly giving over just a short 2-month span. And we've raised about 10,000 of that. And so that's a huge thank you to you guys. We're excited about that. I'm going to pray. We're going to pass the buckets. If you've got out a Connect card, now's the time to drop that in for us. We sure appreciate it. Heavenly Father, man, we just thank you for this opportunity to give. God, we know what you do when we give. I've never in my life met a generous person that is unhappy. God, our generosity breeds generosity and it breeds happiness in our lives. And we thank you that you give us the opportunity to give so that we can watch what you do with just a little bit that we give. As the song said, even when we're weak and poor, we give you all that we have. We ask that you bless these gifts and the givers. In your name we pray. Amen. It's exciting stuff, guys. I'm really pumped. I'm excited. I'm also excited about this series that we're in and that we're going to continue in today. I think it's been a really incredible series. And today, we're going to pick up in 1 Kings chapter 19. And we're going to read verses 9 through 13. Give a little bit of context before we begin to read this. In this, we see the prophet Elijah and he's fleeing. The prophet's taking care of the false idols, the false prophets, and Jezebel has sent a message to him that, hey, I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna finish you off. And so he's on the run. He's moving. And in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 9, we pick up, it says, there he being Elijah, came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And even I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And he said, go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? You know, we live in a world full of noise, right? So much so that we become not only immune to noise, but we learn to desire noise. I remember the night before my very first jury trial. I'm still in law school. I don't even have like a full-blown law license. I just have a full temporary one. And they threw me in the deep end of the pool where the sharks are. And so my first jury trial is a homicide. It's a first-degree murder. I mean, you know, forget like simple possession or a traffic ticket or a DWI. Like, let's just go see if we can do this. Kind of how I live my life, in case y'all are wondering. Throw me in the deep end and let's see if we can swim. If we can't, we'll figure it out. And so I'm laying in bed that night and my mind is racing. I mean, it's racing through all of the facts that I've studied for months. All of the buildup, the anticipation. What's the defense going to be? What angle are they going to take? Is this detective, man, I got to make sure I get these 4 things to prove this element out of this witness. All of the things that lawyers sit in bed and wrestle with at night because you just get one shot. There's no redo. And so I'm sitting there racing and my mind's racing and I can't sleep. And so I do the only logical thing anyone could do, which is turn the TV on. And I fall asleep to the noise of the TV. In the silence that I was laying in, I couldn't stand it. I couldn't control my mind. I couldn't slow it down. I couldn't pump the brakes on all of the emotions and thoughts that were racing through my mind because I desired the noise. I desired something to distract me. I needed a TV show to pull my focus away from what was coming up the next morning so that I to just fall asleep. Any of you ever been there? Laying in bed at night, it's just you can't get it to shut off. The silence becomes scary. The silence and the solitude becomes something that we oftentimes fear. You know, there are some scientists that literally say that the mind is a supercomputer, that we don't ever forget anything. We just store it away and have a hard time finding where it is. When you think about the fact that our brains have the potential to hold everything that we've ever known somewhere in there. Some of you are like, no, trust me, my brain doesn't hold that much. But it's all in there. It's easy to live life with anxiety when you think about that. It's easy to be distracted. It's easy to constantly live with the desire to have some noise to block out the racing of our own minds, of our own thoughts. You know, we're in this series called Fully You. And week 1, we kind of explored the hurt triangle. Jordan, if you could give me that slide there. And we talked about there are these elements of our lives that we all have. Safety. We all desire safety, connection, and empowerment. And when we don't have them, we feel shame in the form of abandonment, rejection, and humiliation. And so we build defenses of self-absorption, self-gratification, and control. Because we say, I'm never going to feel those things. And then week 2, we dove into anger and how anger is a tool that we can use to identify which point on the triangle we struggle with the most. Whenever we feel angry about something, whenever I feel angry because my mom did something for me that I thought I should be able to do on my own, and I no longer feel empowerment, and then I feel humiliation, and I just want to control it. It's a dead giveaway. The anger is always reacting to something else in our lives. And then last week, we began to dive into change. And how change is always inside out. Real and lasting change doesn't occur on the outside first. It occurs within our spirit. The deepest recesses of who we are is where real change occurs. And it works its way to the outside. And we talked about how, at the end of that sermon, how we have to have some spiritual discipline in our life if we're going to experience real change. And so this week we're going to get into something that I'm going to call the freedom triangle. So we have the hurt triangle. Anger identifies which point of the triangle that we're struggling with the most. We know that we need some change. To have change, we need some spiritual discipline. So we're going to talk about that. Jordan, if you could give me that newest slide that we've got. The freedom triangle. We're all desiring freedom. We've talked about that this morning already. Then it comes in 3 parts. Forgiveness, solitude, and community. If we really want to have some spiritual discipline and experience some real change, we've got to have forgiveness, community, and solitude. Today we're going to specifically focus on the concept of solitude. Being alone is not my strong suit. I've told y'all that before. I've confessed it. I like to be around other people. I don't like to be by myself. It can be a great challenge to be by myself. And so what happens is because I become so adapt to having noise and distraction in my life, what I do is I sometimes forget that I need solitude with God. I'm so worried about having other people around me or other things around me or something entertain me or something going on or a challenge that I'm trying to tackle that I miss out on some of the greatest spiritual growth moments in my life, which occur in solitude. They occur in moments when it's just you and God and no one else and nothing else and no one's around you. And what happens is, to put this into a bigger context that we'll dive into more in a couple of weeks, when we lack solitude in our individual spiritual life, it affects the community of believers that we operate in. When we aren't spending time on our own with God, letting Him pour into us and show us who we fully are, to find the full you, to find your true identity, to defeat the hurt triangle and the false self that we sometimes create in our life, man, we just fall apart. So I've got just a few things about that. Number 1, we live in a world that loves noise, but God tends to speak gently in the quiet. You know, silence makes us feel really uncomfortable. feel like you have no control. I want to say something. I want to break it. I want to clap. Some of you folks that hate worship, if I set you in silence for 30 minutes, you'd be begging for this team back. You'd be begging me just to turn the volume up as loud as you want, Pastor. Just don't make us sit in silence. We feel out of control when we're silent. But I love this passage because we have Elijah. He's in a cave, and the passage doesn't literally tell us that he's alone. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to speculate just a little bit, if that's okay. If I'm running for my life, and I know people are chasing me that want to kill me, and I go into a cave, I'm going to bet it's an unoccupied one. Okay? So I'm going to step out on a limb and say Elijah's alone. He's by himself. And he needs God in this moment like nobody could ever need God. He's running for his life. He's living in absolute fear. And then these great big noises come. A wind, an earthquake, and a fire. But the passage is clear that the Lord wasn't in the wind, and he wasn't in the earthquake, and he wasn't in the fire. After the three big noises pass, what happens is Elijah hears a whisper. He hears something quiet. And it's in that moment that he covers his face and he steps out of the cave and God speaks to him. You know, sometimes we're not very good at two-way communication, and we don't always think about that in the context of our relationship with God. You ever been around somebody, maybe you work with them, maybe you live with them, don't nudge them with your elbow if you do, that does all the talking. It's like you never get a word in edgewise. It's like they just talk nonstop, and you just think, if you would just listen for a minute. Sometimes my wife, she's in here, so it's hard to tell stories about her when she's down here. She's normally upstairs with the kids, but it's too beautiful. If I'm in the middle of something and she becomes interested, which is rare, but if she does, what happens is the questions come, and she never gives me the chance to answer it. I'm like, if you let me answer question 1, maybe we won't need question 7. Let's have some dialogue, not a monologue, right? Let's two-way communicate. When I was in undergrad, I took a leadership course with one of the most incredible professors I've ever had. The guy developed all of the leadership materials for Walmart. Needless to say, he was pretty good at what he did. He was pretty special. And he always drew these distinctions between a transformative leader and a transactional leader. And one of the greatest differences is transactional leaders speak, but don't let anyone speak back to them. Transformational leaders speak and then listen. And sometimes they listen and then speak. We don't need transformation from anyone in our life except God. And what happens is in our spiritual walk, in our spiritual disciplines, the first step after you become saved and you begin to enter into some changes, we begin to pray. We begin to talk to God. We begin to have communication with Him. But I want to move us from the point where we just talk to Him to the point where we hear from Him. To the point that we do some talking, but we stop asking the questions long enough that maybe He can actually answer one. That we spend some time alone and in some silence with Him where He can actually impress something on us, where our minds aren't racing and aren't in control, where we aren't trying to dictate how our relationship with Him goes, but rather He's dictating to us what's happening. I don't see anywhere in this passage where it says that when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and he went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here?" Nowhere in that text does it say that Elijah went out and said, "Hey God, what's up, man? How you doing? I mean, what are you going to do? Am I going to die today or am I going to die tomorrow? What are you going to do? Am I going to feed me now? You going to give me some more food so I can make it on the journey? Am I going to stay in the cave? How long am I going to be in the cave? You give me a couch for the cave because it's a little bit rough in the cave. I'm not real sure about the cave. I don't know. Maybe could you give me a cell phone, Facebook, Twitter? I need some approval in my life. Come on, God. Now you're not talking to me now. You're not talking to me now." That's how I treat God sometimes. Like, God, if you would just listen. And He's saying, if you would just shut up. He says that too. It's like Noise builds noise. That's one of the greatest differences of having our third child. Is when the third one came, what happens is, before it was you had two competing for attention, and two competing to be the loudest, and two competing to make the biggest mess, and to be the boss, and two competing to be in control. Now you have three. And Ben has developed his voice. No words, just screaming. I looked at Chris the other day, I said, man, we need to fast forward about 6 months so I can whoop his tail. Had about all that screaming I can live with. About all of it I can deal with. But we get in those environments. You ever been in a restaurant before and you walk in and it's so noisy that you catch yourself screaming at the person across from you, and then when you walk out of the restaurant, you're like, oh. You forgot how noisy it was in there. You became numb to it over the course of an hour or two as you were communicating with your friends. That became the volume with which you expected things to operate. And then you walk out and you're in a moment of silence outside and you say, whoa. That's what we have to do in our spiritual life if we want to experience the full us, the full you. If you really want some spiritual change, some deep down change, you're going to have to find some moments when you get alone and quiet with God, where you experience some two-way communication. Isaiah 30:15 says that strength comes from quietness and trust. Man, that makes me feel weak. I'm just going to be real honest. Quietness and trust. Man, I think about that. I don't brag on my dad enough. He's one of the most special human beings that you will ever meet. He lives a life of spiritual discipline, doing things that no one ever sees. He's the guy that does all the dirty work that nobody ever sees, and he never asks for credit for it. And my dad was never a man of many words. He was kind of speak softly, carry a big stick type. You know? And I see now the strength that he had spiritually that came from his willingness to just be quiet and trust God. To just be quiet and trust that his plans were going to work out in my life. To be quiet and just walk out and cover your face and say, hey, I'm here. Speak when you're ready. I'm willing to be in solitude just so that I can hear you, just so that I can experience you. The challenge is, and point number 2 is that solitude requires intentionality. Before we get to this passage, we see Elijah on the run, and he stops and he's under a tree, and an angel comes to him and says, hey, big dog, you need to get up and eat. You need to get up and eat because you have a journey ahead of you. And the angel actually tells him 2 different times that he needs to get up and eat, and provides food for him so that he can make the journey. He had to have some intentionality in his life to get to the cave, to get to the point where God was going to speak to him. He had to have some intentionality to get to the moment where he could stand in solitude with the Heavenly Father and hear what it was that he had for his life. To do this, we've got to make it a priority. That's simple, but we forget to make it a priority. Sometimes we make lots of things a priority, but we don't make just being alone with God a priority. You know, the opposite of discipline is optional. And so sometimes I just want to challenge all of us, rather than just making it a simple priority, let's make it mandatory in our lives. Right? The opposite of discipline is optional. Raise kids. Give them a choice to do the right thing or make them do the right thing, right? If I give them a choice, it's optional. They're going to choose whatever benefits them most in that moment. If I discipline my kids, I don't give them the choice to do the right thing. I make them do the right thing. We have a choice. God gave us the choice to spend time with Him alone or not, but we also have a second choice, which is I can say, I'm not going to make that optional in my life. I'm going to make it mandatory. Every day, I'm going to find some alone time with Him. Every week, I'm going to find some alone time, some solitude with Him. We have to set realistic goals. I don't know about any of you, but sometimes my goal setting is like I'm a faith guy. Like, let's set this thing so crazy that God gets all the credit for it. And I want to challenge us, man, we should set goals far bigger than ourselves. But sometimes we have to start with a little bit of realistic discipline to build up, right? To fortify ourselves a little bit, to have some protection in our lives, to have a little bit of guidance, a little bit of voice. And then we have to silence the monkeys. You know the monkeys jumping around in your head? They're not just on your back, they're in your mind, and it's like they're on a trampoline and they're just going crazy. I was taught this by a really, really skilled trial lawyer, a lot better than me. The guy's whooped me in courtroom a couple times, and he likes to teach me a little something on the way out. It's real kind of him. One of the things that he taught me was that when you're in an important mode in your life, a serious mode, for a lawyer, that's a jury trial. For you, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a big decision at work coming up. Maybe it's a big life change. Maybe it's a move. Maybe it's a new relationship. The monkeys are going to be in your head. They're going to be racing. They're going to be going. And he told me, he said, son, keep a notepad on your nightstand when you're in trial. When you wake up, you just write down whatever's at the top of your head and you go back to sleep. He said, you'll train yourself that you'll know that will be there in the morning. And so rather than obsessing over it all night, you'll wake up and you'll look at your notes. And he said, sometimes they won't make a lick of sense, and sometimes it'll be the greatest revelation you've ever had in your life. Man, when we get solitude, when we get silence with God, when we're waiting on Him to speak to us rather than us just shouting at Him and rushing Him and moving Him, I promise you the monkeys are going to come. The worries of tomorrow are going to creep up and be in your head. The worries of next month, the fears of yesterday, all of that stuff will be there. Take a pad when you want to get alone with God and say, you know what, I'm going to write down whatever that monkey is. And I'm going to set it aside and I'll get to that monkey when I'm done. And at first, you probably won't have a lot of success with it. I'm just going to tell you. But if you really want it, what'll happen is you'll train yourself to say, you know what, write it down. It'll be there whenever I finish. I'm going to spend this time alone with God. It takes a little bit of discipline. You know, one of the great challenges of pastoring a church, y'all are going to laugh, this is me just being 100% candid. One of the great challenges of pastoring a church is finding time to spend alone with God. And you say, well, that's your whole job. Isn't that what you should do? There's a distraction for a distraction for a distraction. And then be a full-time volunteer pastor and run a law firm at the same time. I've had to buckle myself down and say, I'm going to find intentional time that I spend in solitude with God, because it's not a choice. It's mandatory. It's not optional. It's a discipline that I'm going to have. Point number 3 is that practicing solitude has many forms. It's going to look different for all of us. Andrew Erickson's a psychologist, and he wrote a book. And in that book, he talks about what he calls the 10,000 hour rule, which is that if you want to be an expert in anything, you have to spend about 10,000 hours doing it to be an expert at it. But he goes a little bit deeper than that, and he says you have to have a deliberate practice. Those 10,000 hours can't just be 10,000 accidental hours. They have to be 10,000 intentional hours that you devote to something. Now think about that. It's like, so I've got to spend 10,000 hours in solitude with the big man upstairs before I'm even close to an expert at it. 10,000 hours with the big man upstairs. I got some ground to make up, folks. I do a lot of chattering at the man. I don't always do a lot of listening. I don't always do a lot of just, I'm going to sit and let you impress upon me what you want. But it comes in different forms. For some of us, it's what we would call meditation. Sometimes that takes on a negative connotation. Eastern meditation is all about emptying the mind, becoming an empty vessel. But you know, Christian meditation is talked about all through Scripture. And Christian meditation is about filling the mind with God's truths. It's about making His truth the truth that you live by. You say, I want to be the full me. I want to find my true identity in Christ. Sometimes you have to meditate on the truths of what He has said about you. about how much He loves you and cares about you and cares for you, about how bright the future is for you and the plans that He has for you. Sometimes you got to say, everything around me is a wreck, but one day I'm going to make it to heaven, and it will all be worthwhile. I've got to speak those truths into my life. I have to perfectly understand it. When some of you are like, I'm not that good at meditating. I promise you, you are. You meditate on your fears and your worries and your concerns. You meditate on everything that tells you what you can't be, what you can't do, the problems that you have in your life, the shortfalls, that you're not good enough, that your yesterday say that you can't make it today, that your yesterday say that your future will never work out, that your marriage is guaranteed to fail because you come from a family of divorce, that your bills will never be paid because you don't make enough money, that you'll never have anything nice in your life, that you'll never have a good relationship, that you'll never make it through college. We meditate on everything that we shouldn't, rather than filling ourselves in some solitude with Him, with the truths of what He has said about your life and about who you are. For some of us, it comes in the form of just pure study. You know, I love this passage. Hebrews 4:12 says that for the Word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing the division of soul and of spirit, of joints and of marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. Last week we talked about how there's a difference in our soul and our spirit. You want to find that separation point? Study God's Word. Because it's sharper than any two-edged sword, and it pierces the division of soul and spirit. Your spirit's where true and lasting life change comes in. What I really love from this passage, though, is that what it tells me is that when we study God's Word, His Word studies us. It's active. It's not like just reading just a regular book that you just read it and then I just put it down on the shelf and whatever I got, and what I didn't. We're reading it. And it's studying us back. It's revealing things back to us. It's working back in and through us. It's separating soul and spirit. It's separating bone and marrow. It's drawing out the things of you that don't need to be there and putting into you all of the things that should be. Number 3. If I could get the worship team back up here. One of the forms of solitude that we are really, really bad at is privacy. Man, we talk a lot about addiction in the forms of drugs or alcohol, but we don't talk a lot about the addiction for approval. And we are addicted to approval in today's society. We seek approval nonstop, all the time. And if I could just get one more like. Man, if I could just get one more repost, one more share, what would that mean? And if you want some real lasting spirit change in your life, you've got to find some things that need to be kept private. And I'm not talking about everything in your life. There are lots of things that we share. There are lots of things we do. And if you shared this part of your life with everyone around you, this is not a criticism. This is just an example, just a teaching example. But when I proposed to my wife, I didn't invite everyone to be a part of it. Her family, my family, everyone to be a part of it. And I think it may have even hurt some feelings, if we were being really, really honest. But I looked at it like this. I'm not marrying everyone around her. And if our marriage is on the rocks and Satan's pushing our backs up against the wall, they can't fix my marriage. They can't solve our problems. They can't do this for us. They can't do it with us. They can only support us. And so it was a moment that I shared with just her in private. I didn't need the world to see it. I didn't need the world's approval. I had God's. I had spoken to Him, and He had spoken back to me that she was the one. I didn't need everything around me to say, yeah, you're right. Good job, Jacob. But we're desperate for approval, and the only approval we need is God's. The only approval that you need for any decision you make in your life is God's, which means there's some times in your life when you've got a big decision or a big opportunity or a big moment that you just need to spend some time alone with Him. And the devil loves distraction. Last week I said that fear is one of the greatest tools of the devil. Distraction's right there with it. I imagine me and Elijah. This wind comes, and this crazy earthquake, and this wildfire. I'm not sure I have the guts to come out of the cave at that point, guys. I may have just sat in the back of it in the dark and waited to die. Man, the devil loves distraction because the Lord wasn't in the wind, or the earthquake, or the fire. He was whispering quietly. He was whispering in a still, small voice. But we're so afraid to be silent with Him. We're so afraid to just be in solitude with Him. We're so afraid to just be alone with Him that it becomes a challenge to change because we don't let Him move the innermost part of who we are. I don't know who this is for. And this sermon was written a long time ago. But this is from today. Second Chronicles 20 and 17 says, "You will not need to fight in this battle. Stand firm, hold your position, and see the salvation of the Lord on your behalf. O Judah and Israel, do not be afraid, and do not be dismayed. Tomorrow, go out, and the Lord will be with you." Someone in this room needs to understand that all you have to do is get alone with Him. That you don't have to fight this battle that's in front of you. That you don't have to fight the enemy. That you don't have to fight the addiction. You don't have to fight for the need for approval. You don't have to fight for everything that's going on around you. All you have to do is stand firm. All you have to do is get alone with Him for just a moment and just let Him speak to you. Let Him guide you. Let Him put you in the cave and then draw you back out when the time is right. And victory is always one moment away. And we don't always see that. We don't always feel it because it doesn't come in our time. But victory is always just the moment in which you give it to God away. It's the moment that you transfer the burden to Him. It's one. It's the moment that you give Him the challenge. It's one. It's the moment you give Him the relationship. It's one. It's the moment you give Him the worry. It's one. It's the moment you give Him the fear. It's one. It's the moment that you hand off the desperation in your life and the depression. It's the moment that you give Him the best parts of you and the worst parts of you that He's won. You may not see the victory today, but the victory is done. Man, we miss it. I love this because it says you will not need to fight in this battle. Stand firm and hold your position and see what? The salvation of the Lord on your behalf. Man, when you get down and you don't know what else to do, and you don't know how to be in solitude with Him, I just want you to just sit. And I just want you to picture, man, a man just hanging for you. Sometimes we see that image and we think about Him dying on the cross and we think, yeah, He did it for all of us. No. You see, He did, but He did it for you. Literally, you. Literally, you. He didn't do it like, oh, this is just one big swooping motion and like, oh, it's... No. He literally hung on the cross and said, I'm going to take the sins of Jacob and I'm going to put them on my back. And I'm going to take the sins of Jared and I'm going to hold them. And I'm going to take the sins of Gentry, and I'm going to take the sins of Greg, and I'm going to take care of all of them. You don't have to fight the battle of tomorrow. Man, they're going to sing a song. I want to challenge everyone in this room. We said, oh man, you talked about solitude, Jacob. That's great. Let's put it to practice for just 5 minutes. 5 minutes. What a great starting point, right? Let's find a place at an altar. Kneel at your chair. Find somewhere to just say, I'm not going to be distracted. I'm not going to be defeated. I'm going to just sit in His presence and let Him work. It's like the simplest song you've ever heard. Over and over they sing, this is how I fight my battles. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. This is how I fight my battles. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. And let's speak that to ourselves in some moments of solitude this week. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. Love you guys. Have a great week. See you next week.